Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Kathy sat across from Roger, bathed in the warm glow of the upscale restaurant. Her laughter drifted out naturally, like an actress perfectly embodying her role. On the surface, she appeared at ease, savoring the evening, her eyes glistening as she whispered a playful joke to her lover. But beneath that composed facade, tension coiled tightly within her. Anxiety gnawed at her insides, a relentless sense of foreboding shadowing her every move. Each time her phone buzzed on the table, she flinched, a flash of panic flickering in her gaze before she forced another smile. Roger, on the other hand, seemed blissfully unaware, his demeanor smooth and untroubled as he sipped his wine, as if the world outside this moment simply ceased to exist. But Kathy knew better. This affair was always a risky gamble. Roger was everything her husband Ben was not: daring, electrifying, unpredictable. He had swept her into a whirlwind, a stark contrast to the steady, kind man she had married. Ben had been perfect in so many ways, a man she had once loved deeply, with all her heart. Yet here she was, entwined in an affair with Roger, caught up in something she couldn't even justify to herself. She had considered ending it countless times, fully aware that she should. Each encounter with Roger was a chance to break away, to tell him it was over. But the words always failed her, and she found herself drawn back by his irresistible pull. Tonight, however, something felt different. When her phone buzzed again, Kathy glanced down and felt her blood turn to ice. A new notification glowed on the screen. "Enjoy this evening because it will be over soon." The message was from Ben. A wave of dread washed over her, making her hands clammy and her heart thunder in her chest. She stared at the ominous words, trying to process them. How could he know? What did "it will be over soon" mean? The restaurant around her seemed to spin, the sounds fading into a distant murmur. She struggled to steady her breath, fighting to maintain her composure. Roger, noticing her sudden pallor, leaned forward, concern creasing his brow. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his hand reaching out to cover hers. But she wasn't okay. Her world was teetering on the edge of collapse, and she had no idea. Roger lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Unaware of the storm raging within her, Roger leaned in, pressing his lips to Kathy's. He continued talking, but his words blurred into the background as Kathy's mind fixated on the message. The chill of Ben's warning snaked up her spine, relentless and unnerving. She had no idea what he had planned, but one thing was certain: tonight would not end the way she had imagined. It had started about a month ago. Ben had always trusted Kathy, never questioning her late nights or outings. But one evening, when she returned late from a dinner with friends, something shifted. As she bent down to kiss him goodnight, he caught a faint trace of an unfamiliar cologne. Expensive, distinct, and undeniably not his own. It was subtle, yet enough to plant a seed of doubt. Ben wasn't the kind of man to act impulsively. He was patient, sharp, and methodical. When he caught that hint of another man's cologne, he didn't lash out or confront her right away. Instead, he began to observe, quietly and meticulously. Day by day, he noticed subtle changes. Kathy's distant gaze, her eyes flitting to her phone more frequently, the way she kept it within arm's reach at all times. Sometimes, he'd catch her smiling softly at a message, a smile that twisted his insides with cold certainty. Her behavior told him everything he needed to know. Kathy, lost in the thrill of her affair, was too blinded by excitement to realize how careless she had become. She believed she was being discreet, that her secret was safe, but Ben saw through it all. And he wasn't simply waiting in silence out of hurt or bewilderment. He was strategizing. Every gentle word, every affectionate gesture was deliberate, a mask concealing the storm that churned inside him. Ben wasn't one to lash out in anger. That wasn't his style. No, Ben was waiting for the perfect moment, a time when Kathy would be too entangled in her deceit to anticipate the reckoning that awaited her. Her phone buzzed again, and a jolt of fear shot through her. With shaking hands, she glanced down at the screen to see another message from Ben. "Do you really think no one will find out about this?" The words swam before her eyes, and a wave of panic gripped her. She struggled to keep her expression calm, her fingers curling tightly around her phone. But the pressure inside her was mounting, a suffocating force she could no longer contain. Leaving wasn't an option. Not here. Not in this exclusive restaurant where every eye could so easily track her movements. The anxiety clawed at her, creeping up her spine like an inescapable shadow. The walls felt as though they were pressing in, squeezing the air from her lungs. Roger's voice became a distant murmur, indistinct and irrelevant as her gaze swept the room. Everything appeared normal. Diners engaged in conversations, laughter, the clinking of silverware. Yet Kathy felt the undercurrent of dread pull tighter. Then she saw them. At a table just across the room, faces unmoving, were her relatives, her uncle, her cousin with his wife, and worst of all, her sister. Their eyes were locked on hers, heavy with silent condemnation. Not a word was spoken, but their expressions said it all. They knew. They knew everything. Kathy's hands trembled, and the air felt thin as her mind raced. Her family had always been deeply conservative, unyielding in their values, and betrayal was something they could never forgive. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. Her carefully guarded secret life was slipping away, unraveling before her eyes. One by one, they stood from their seats, their gaze still fixed on her, full of silent condemnation. Kathy could only watch in horror as they turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her to drown in their silent verdict. Her thoughts spun wildly. This had to be Ben. He had known all along, and now he had made sure her family knew too. The walls of her double life were collapsing, and there was no stopping it. Just days before, Ben had met with Kathy's relatives in private. He had been composed and methodical as he laid out the evidence he'd painstakingly collected. Photos, messages, every damning piece of her betrayal. At first, they were incredulous, shocked by what he showed them. But Ben was steady and resolute, leaving no room for doubt. He asked them not to intervene, not to confront her, but to witness how she would unravel her own life. Their agreement had been silent, but their disappointment spoke volumes. Now, they were there to witness it all unravel. As Ben's carefully orchestrated plan played out around Kathy, the once warm and welcoming restaurant now felt cold and suffocating. It seemed as though everyone could see the guilt etched on her face. Roger, sitting across from her, noticed her growing unease. His brows knitted with concern as he leaned in closer. "Kathy, what's going on?" he asked softly, worry tinging his voice. "You're shaking. Are you okay?" Kathy forced a smile, but it was thin and unconvincing. She couldn't bring herself to tell him, couldn't explain the storm raging in her mind. The condemning stares of her family, Ben's cryptic messages. Everything was closing in, threatening to break her apart. She tried to steady herself, but the panic surged relentlessly. "I love you, Kathy," Roger said, his voice brimming with sincerity as he took her hand in his, holding it tightly. "If something's wrong, we'll figure it out. I won't leave you. Let's get out of here. Somewhere more private, quieter. Just you and me." Kathy's chest constricted. She wanted to agree, to escape this suffocating reality, but the words caught in her throat. Just as she summoned the courage to speak, a faint buzz cut through the tension. Roger's phone. He glanced at the screen, and in an instant, everything changed. His face went pale, the easy smile vanished, and his eyes filled with something Kathy had never seen before. Fear. Without a word, he stood abruptly, pulling out his wallet and hastily counting out cash to cover the bill. The suddenness of it left Kathy stunned. "Roger, wait. What's going on? Did something happen?" she asked, her voice rising with alarm. But he didn't look at her or respond. His movements were hurried, almost panicked, as if he needed to be anywhere but there. Kathy's hand shot out to grab his arm, desperate for answers, her mind spinning with questions. "Roger, talk to me. Let me come with you," Kathy pleaded, but Roger raised his hand, halting her. His voice was firm, colder than she had ever heard it. "No, I have serious problems to deal with. This will take a long time." Kathy's heart sank at his tone. She had never seen him like this. As he turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of his phone screen before it went dark. It was a message from a woman, but she hadn't seen the name. "Roger, please," she called out, her voice cracking, but he didn't stop. He threw her one last look, his expression stern and distant, sending a chill through her. "Goodbye, Kathy," he muttered, and then he was gone, leaving her standing alone. Stunned, Kathy sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. She had believed Roger was free, that he had no other commitments, but as the pieces started to come together, the truth began to dawn on her. He had been hiding something all along. A wife. A life he never mentioned. The man she thought she knew was wrapped in his own web of secrets. Ben had known about Roger's double life long before Kathy ever suspected. Roger wasn't just another man seeking a fling. He had a wife, and their marriage was entwined in complex business and property dealings that made divorce impractical. Instead of ending his marriage, Roger had sought out mistresses to fulfill his fantasies in secret. Ben, patient and strategic, had uncovered this secret and, just a few days before tonight's dinner, discreetly slipped the details to Roger's wife. Now, everything was unraveling for Roger. As Kathy sat alone at the table, it struck her. Roger wasn't going to comfort her. He wasn't coming back. He would vanish from her life, just as he had disappeared from the restaurant. Kathy's phone vibrated again, shattering the silence that had enveloped her. Tears filled her eyes as she struggled to hold them back. Roger was gone. Her family had turned their backs on her, and now she was truly alone. The screen lit up with another message from Ben. "Don't go home, Kathy. You don't have a home anymore." Her heart raced as panic surged within her, the room beginning to blur around her. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair, desperate to fix things. There had to be a way to salvage this. Kathy hurried out of the restaurant, driven by a frantic need to stop her world from collapsing. Her breaths came in short gasps as she fumbled for her keys, finally managing to get into her car. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. The engine roared to life, and she sped off toward the apartment, desperate to make sense of it all. The drive felt endless, her mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. He couldn't mean it. He wouldn't just throw her out, would he? She tried to calm herself, clinging to the hope that somehow she could talk to Ben and explain everything. But deep down, she knew the truth. He had been planning this for a long time. When Kathy finally arrived at the apartment, a sick feeling crept over her. The door swung open easily, but the warmth she had always felt stepping inside was gone. The place felt cold and empty. Her footsteps echoed through the room as her eyes locked on the sight before her. In the center of the living room were several cardboard boxes, neatly packed with her belongings, her clothes, her shoes, her books, all reduced to mere boxes. On the shelf, 2 stacks of papers awaited her. One was a pile of divorce papers, and the other was a torn-up lease. Kathy's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening as the reality of it hit her. Ben had ended the lease. She had to leave by tomorrow. Tears welled up in her eyes, her body shaking as the sobs finally broke free. Kathy collapsed to her knees, clutching the divorce papers as the weight of her choices crashed down on her. Ben had planned it all with chilling precision. The apartment had always been in his name, a detail Kathy had never thought twice about, but it gave him the leverage he needed. While she had been at dinner with Roger, believing her world was still intact, Ben had moved quickly and efficiently, packing her belongings into boxes and placing them where she couldn't miss them. He signed the divorce papers, laying them out beside the torn-up lease, an unmistakable signal that her life there was over. There were no angry words, no dramatic confrontations. Ben didn't want a scene. He wanted Kathy to realize what she had lost when it was already too late. As Kathy sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face, her phone buzzed one last time. The final message from Ben appeared on the screen. "Kathy, you have made your choice." Lying on the cold floor of the apartment, Kathy sobbed uncontrollably, the weight of everything crushing her. The space that had once been filled with warmth and love now felt like a tomb, cold and empty, with only the boxes of her belongings as reminders of the life she had lost. Her tears felt endless as she struggled to grasp the finality of it all. In a desperate haze, Kathy reached for her phone, her trembling fingers hovering over Ben's contact before she pressed call. The phone rang, the long beeps echoing in the silent apartment, each one tearing through her heart like a knife, but no one answered. Ben was ignoring her. She remembered the plans they had made together, the life they were supposed to build. In 3 months, they were going to buy a house and leave this city behind for a fresh start. They had even talked about starting a family. They had dreams and plans for the future, all rooted in their love. Now, because of one reckless affair, everything was destroyed. Kathy hadn't wanted to lose Ben. She hadn't wanted to lose everything. All she had wanted was to feel that thrill, that secret excitement with Roger, thinking it would be harmless, just a secret fling. But it had shattered her life in ways she never anticipated. In a moment of despair, she thought of Roger. Maybe he would help me. Maybe he can explain everything. She dialed his number, holding her breath and waiting for him to answer, but there was nothing, not even a beep. Confused, she tried again, but the same silence greeted her. It took Kathy a moment to realize what had happened. Roger had blocked her. She was cut off completely, just like that, disappearing into the shadows where their affair had thrived. Her heart sank deeper, and her chest tightened with an overwhelming sense of abandonment. Had she meant nothing to him at all? The hurt became too much, and rage boiled inside her. A bitter fury at the world, at herself, at everything. She leaped to her feet and kicked the nearest box, sending it flying across the room. She punched another one, spilling its contents across the floor. Clothes, books, trinkets from her life with Ben, all scattered like broken pieces of her soul. She screamed and kicked, letting out every bit of pain until her body ached and her breath came in ragged gasps. 20 minutes later, exhausted and hollow, she collapsed in the middle of the mess she had created. Tears streamed down her face as she gasped for air, feeling utterly lost. With shaky hands, she grabbed her phone again and dialed her uncle. He answered after the second ring, his voice stern and heavy. The silence between them was thick with tension, the memory of his cold stare at the restaurant still fresh in Kathy's mind. "Uncle, I need your help," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her uncle's tone was hard and unforgiving. "My girl, you made a big mistake. This is a shame to our family." Kathy choked back a sob, but her tears kept flowing. "Please, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I need you." Her uncle's sigh came through the phone, heavy with disappointment. "I promised your father, Kathy. I promised him I'd look after you," her uncle said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "But you didn't just betray Ben. You betrayed all of us, your father, your family. You've put us all in a difficult place. I didn't mean to." Kathy sobbed, desperation cracking her voice. "I never wanted this." For a long moment, her uncle was silent. Then, with a deep sigh, his tone softened slightly. "Family doesn't abandon its own. I won't leave you, Kathy, but you need to understand. You will have to atone for this. It's not going to be easy, and things between us won't be the same. Not until you've made this right." Kathy's heart broke all over again, shame burning through her as his words sank in. But at least she wasn't completely alone. "Thank you, Uncle," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, his voice still firm. "There's a long road ahead, and you'll have to earn back our trust." The call ended, leaving Kathy with the sound of silence once again. She dropped the phone, her body limp and heavy with despair. She couldn't bring herself to move. All she could do was lie there, curled up on the cold floor as the darkness of the night swallowed her whole. Hours passed, but she didn't care. She stayed still and broken until the first light of morning crept through the window, casting pale shadows on the walls of the empty apartment. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.